Hello, and welcome back to Flyer Sports. I'm Joe Sullivan.
And I'm Sean Vitalis.
On this episode, we will continue our coverage of the men's basketball team, focusing on their recent 4-game stretch where they went 2-2.
The Flyers picked up valuable wins over Loyola, Chicago, and Richmond, but fell to Rhode Island and St. Bonaventure.
Flyers started the 4-game stretch with a disappointing 75-70 loss to the Rhode Island Rams, who are led by head coach Archie Miller. Many Flyer fans might remember that Miller gave Dayton some great teams in recent history.
This is the first time that Dayton has faced off against their former coach since he left the university in 2017. Miller got the best of the Flyers this time as the Rams stunned the Flyers in Kingston.
Dayton was led in scoring by Deron Holmes, who ended up with 19 points. He went 8 from 11 from the floor, and Kobe Elvis went 4 of 5 from deep and finished with 14 points of his own.
Dayton went on a 9-minute scoring drought in the first half, which allowed the Rams to run away early. Once Rhode Island took the lead, they never gave it back.
The second game featured a great Flyer win over the Richmond Spiders. Dayton was most productive on the fast break in this dominant win.
A great all-around performance by Malachi Smith, and just his third game back from injury, led them to a blowout win over Richmond. This is just one of his 13 assists, with only one turnover in the game.
Kobe Elvis finds Malachi Smith streaking up the floor. Smith dishes it to Deron for this monster slam. Flyers show great defense as Kobe Brea pokes the ball away from the Spiders and turns his defense into even better offense as he throws this time to Mustafa Amzil.
The Flyers' fast break scoring doesn't stop there as the Flyers push the tempo on this one. Malachi Smith finds Kobe Brea for a sweet 3.
That's a great link-up play by two of the best talents from New York.
Yeah, Joe, what a play there.
Second half now as Deron Holmes uses his underrated playmaking to find Brea for the open look.
Brea went 6 of 7 from deep in his 18-point performance. Recent returner for the Flyers, Malachi Smith, finds Deron Holmes down low with a nice bounce pass that leads to a poster dunk.
This great defensive play from Malachi Smith sums up Dayton's dominant win over Richmond as they went on to win this one 86-60.
Now onto a thrilling Flyer win over 7-14 Loyola, Chicago. The Ramblers played their best game of the season and sent the game into overtime, although the Flyers ended up on top in this one.
Toumani Camara had a season-high 31 points, going 10 from 14 from the floor, with Malachi Smith having 21 points and 8 assists of his own. These performances propelled the Flyers to an uncomfortable but important win over Loyola.
In a back-and-forth battle, Dayton led by 6 with less than a minute to go in the second half. The Ramblers hit 2 clutch threes down the stretch to force overtime at UD Arena.
Dayton outscored Loyola 13-9 as they held off the Ramblers' late surge. The Flyers moved to 15-8 on the season and picked up an important A-10 win to improve to 7-3 in conference.
After the narrow win over Loyola, the Flyers looked to put in a strong performance over the 12-11 St. Bonaventure. Dayton started with a healthy lead over the Bonnies as Zimi Wokeji finds fellow big man Deron Holmes II down low for an early slam.
The Bonnies answered right back with a 3 midway through the first half as they looked to climb back into the game. With just 4 minutes left in the first half, Chad Venning punishes the rim off this dime from Moses Flowers.
Early in the second half, Malachi Smith closes the deficit to 3 points as he finds Deron down low for the finish.
Midway through the second half now, St. Bonaventure extends their lead into double digits as they turn good defense into even better offense. Barry Evans gets a steal and a nice bucket on the other end. Kobe Brea has something to say as he responds with a catch-and-shoot 3 to make it a 7-point ball game. That was one of only 4 makes from deep for the Flyers.
Darryl Banks III responds right back with a 3 of his own while getting fouled to give the Bonnies a lead yet again. St. Bonaventure held a double-digit lead for almost 5 minutes in the second half. The Bonnies didn't look back as Banks makes a great play, grabbing his own rebound, and finishes off the Flyers once and for all.
St. Bonaventure with a great game offensively. Obviously, started really hot shooting from deep. Coming into this year, the Bonnies didn't have any returning players from last year's team, and over the past few years, they've had some great teams. But this year, really beat the Flyers, worked great offensively, got some stops down the stretch, and picked up a huge win for them.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the Bonnies didn't have anybody returning, and Dayton's got pretty much everybody returning. Dayton was a team that was coming into A-10 play with a ton of experience, and, we really thought that we were going to run it back. A lot of ESPN projections had us going Elite 8, Sweet 16, and wiping out the A-10, but, like we've seen, it's been a pretty completely different story so far.
Yeah, in the first 10 minutes of the game, the Flyers scored 20. The next 30, they scored only 39 points, so really struggled after that super hot start offensively and really couldn't get things going.
Yeah, well, Joe, Tumani Kamara is leading the team in 17 points per game over the last 4 games, and Deron Holmes II, his scoring's taken a dip over the last 4, just 15 points per game. So we're feeding it to the big men, and those are our highest scorers, but we've talked a ton about the guard play, and over the last 5 or 6 games, Malachi Smith is averaging 9 points, 6 assists, and that's on just under a turnover a game. Pretty efficient stats for him. And Kobe Elvis is at 8 points, 2.5 assists, and he's up to 25 minutes a game. So I think the guards are coming back, but they're not where we need them to be.
Yeah, and we started off the show talking about that loss to Rhode Island, and the first game back, facing former coach Archie Miller, in a Rhode Island team that came into the game 6-13 on the year, probably Archie Miller's least talented team that he's ever had. And he gave the Flyers the business with a big win. A lot of struggle. Again, 3-point shooting and free throws for Dayton.
Yeah, I mean, Rhode Island just outshot us. They were on fire from deep, especially in that first half. They couldn't miss, and I'm sure that Archie Miller came in with a chip on his shoulder. He obviously left Dayton for what some might have thought to be a better job at IU and had his struggles in the Big Ten, and now is back in A-10 play. But it seems like he's playing at a worse team in the A-10 in Rhode Island, but they got the better of UD that time.
Yeah, and the league right now, the A-10 in general, is just up for grabs. You got VCU up there, St. Louis, Dayton's kind of trailing behind, and St. Bonaventure is now, I believe, they're 7-4 in conference play, so they're another contender that can maybe win the conference and head into March. But really, there's really no teams that can pick up an at-large bid at this point with the struggles that those top 4 teams has had in A-10 play.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, a lot of people have talked about this as a down year for the A-10, and I think in the net rankings we're definitely seeing that, but I think it's a pretty exciting race for the top 4. I mean, it's kind of anybody can clinch that automatic qualifying bid into March, and we're not going to see multiple teams from the A-10, but any of the top 4, or maybe even a 5 or 6 seed, if they win that tournament, they're in.
Yeah, and it's going to be a really big week for the Dayton Flyers, as tomorrow they'll take on VCU at VCU for a rematch from the earlier matchup they had this season where the Flyers were up 14 at half and VCU came back and gave them their first loss at home and their first loss in A-10 play. A big game for them. Be interesting to see where the Flyers are at after that loss against St. Bonaventure.
Yeah, I think we're going to need 40 minutes of great basketball here. I think in VCU we saw 20, maybe even 30 minutes, but that 10 that they didn't play well, VCU got the better of them. And like you said, once they got out to that lead, I mean, there was no coming back. So, I mean, the Flyers are going to have to play every minute, both halves, whether it's the bench, whether it's the starters. We're going to have to play some of UD's best basketball, and they're definitely capable of that. I think in that Richmond win, I mean, they blew them out, and Richmond's a relatively quality team in the A-10, and I think we're going to need that style of basketball. Getting out in transition, I think if one of the guards can light it up, I think that UD will be really dangerous.
Yeah, and the big week for them won't stop there as they'll take on St. Louis at home this Friday. Again, another big game. 2 of the top teams in the A-10 they'll be taking on. Going into this point of the season, you thought, okay, maybe the Flyers would be fighting for that top spot. They're sitting at 3rd in the A-10 right now. I think these 2 games are going to be important to really show fans and just college basketball fans in general where Dayton is at in this point of the season.
Yeah, and we've got both games against SLU remaining. So, I mean, we already dropped the first one against VCU, but if we could get that VCU game, and if we could win both at SLU, I think that we could contend for that 1 seed. I mean, it's a lot to ask considering some of the losses that we just had, but I definitely don't think that it's out of the question.
We've seen all year that the A-10 standings have, really switched up with how these teams have been playing, and again, it's kind of been a down year for the A-10, but again, a big week for the Flyers. Taking on VCU tomorrow on the road, and then this Friday they'll have St. Louis at home. And a big chance for them to pick up 2 huge A-10 wins and maybe get that top spot going into March. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this episode of Flyer Sports. I'm Joe Sullivan.
I'm Sean Vitalis.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time here on Flyer TV.